Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Progressive Brothers podcast. This is episode 1. I'm here with my co-host, Renaissance Man.
What's up? Peace to the chat. Peace to everyone on the panel.
Yes. So, topic of tonight: do the progressive left have a branding issue? And the reason why I brought this up is because throughout the election cycle for 2020, what we saw was a lot of pushback coming from people on the left, more importantly, black men pushing back, saying, "Hey, I'm not really feeling, the 46, what we now know as the 46 President Biden. We're not really feeling Kamala. We're not really feeling the left. I think I'm going to go vote, for 45, right?" And the pushback comes from a place of we don't really like what we see, not actually what we know, is from what I can gather, right? They don't like the optics of rainbow flags and things of that nature, all of this leftism, liberalism, and communism, and socialism, and Marxism, and all these other isms that they can't stand about it. Somehow they seem to be irked by this. And so I wanted to get, kind of your thoughts, Renaissance. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Just when you listen to, I know people, he's not popular in this space, but Roland Martin elaborated on this with basically saying Democrats have a problem with black men appealing to black men. I think Trump, I think he only compounded that issue because he really emphasized sort of a very much of a strong man type of mentality. So I think it brought up the divide even more so between the two parties.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it'll be interesting to see going forward if black men are as attracted to the Republican Party when Trump is not necessarily the front and center.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if Trump is the only binding, I guess source to the political body, and he's no longer in office, then what would be their purpose for, going to the right?
A lot of them, I think, in this space, at least want to stick it to the women, which, I mean, everyone's free to do what they want politically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's necessarily the sharpest thing to do, but that's where a lot of men are. So, like I said, Trump is going to definitely have an impact. It's definitely becoming more of a working class party. I think that element is there too.
Mm-hmm.
The key will be to see, does that transfer into policy, which I don't think it does. I don't see how the Republican Party can really brand itself as a working class party. You literally, I was listening to the news the other day. You literally have corporations that have come out secretly, and I believe it's McDonald's maybe in their shareholders meeting, essentially saying, "Hey, $15 minimum wage won't really hurt us." Economists and all these other politicians make a huge deal about it, but the businesses are kind of like, it may actually help us as far as productivity and worker morale and keep people engaged. So when you have a one party that's really pushing that, and another party whose leadership is staunchly against it, I just don't see how anything can really appeal to working class people. And then, you're always going to have that element of race when you start talking about, working class white men as the core base of the Republican Party. And then, those people teaming up with black men to form a party, it's hard to swallow.
Right. And that's kind of, perplexing to me too, because the left has been known for, prison, criminal justice reform, prison reform, fight for, the labor movement. We saw that with Biden, when he was outside of Stop and Shop, really campaigning with the union strike out there, in 2019, I think it was early 2020 or late 2019, sometime around then. I think it was before the pandemic. Just before the pandemic, he was out there with them stomping. And you think about all of these reforms, it really came from the left, the progressive left. And then the pushback that I hear is somehow the branding. They always seem to come back to these isms, liberalism, communism, socialism, Marxism, and they don't like the the rainbow left, so to speak, right? They don't like the rainbow left, and it seems like there's nothing really of substance that they can bring up outside of the idea that, well, progressive black men, how can you be a progressive black man, in this sort of climate? How can you be a progressive black man? What's so progressive about you guys? And the idea here is that if you're on the left, then you must be compromised. And I'm saying, couldn't you say that for being on the right too? Like, I don't see the victories on the ground coming from the right.
Yeah. I think too, you can also look at the fact that I think some of it's ego, in the sense, if you basically see your party as someone who's constantly having to agitate and push for reform and changes, it kind of can remind, I guess, some people that they are discriminated against. They may feel it's sort of unmasculine because that tends to be a lot of rhetoric in this space. Is stop being a victim. Why are you being a victim? So I think that may be an element of it too. Is just it to them, it comes across as maybe weak of having to say that, hey, society's against me. I need reform.
Identity politics, then, right? So what we're seeing is, and you can unmute yourself. The identity politics is, black, pro-black, the fist, right? All of these sort of symbolic gestures and things like that, they seem to have a problem with. And I'm saying to myself, I thought that, the progressive left has a lot of victories on this belt. Why not criticize the victories and not so much about the optics? But it seems like the optics seems to be the only thing that they seem to point at, and I can't understand. Okay, so how do you engage people who only focus on the optics?
Well, I mean, that is sort of, I mean, I guess you sort of have to counter that back with a better image. That is, I've always thought, is the one area that Republicans have always consistently beat Democrats, and that's in the area of basically branding. Republicans are very good at slogans and bumper sticker type of issues, and just getting people to rally around things like that. And Dems seem to be a lot more, complex and deeper in their analysis on how they present issues. So I think honestly that's why Cube got a lot of traction, at least in this space. Was he was one of those people that a lot of black men identified with, or they felt that, hey, he's someone who I want representing black men, and they didn't necessarily care that the the platinum plan that Trump was pushing, that he was essentially um, up there to help work on. They didn't really critique him much on that, and they weren't really plugged in on his whole contract with Black America as far as the actual contract and where the ideas and ideologies came from. Because we talked about that was a far left plan. So unfortunately, you may have to have people like that who are there as sort of image consultants, and not necessarily, pander to the depth of the issues, which is, to me, kind of the whole problem when you hear black people say, oh, politicians essentially come to our community and, Bill Clinton plays the saxophone, and, people pander by coming to our church and, coming to the cookout, this and that. But it's like, if that's what you respond to, you can't, it's hard to really change that paradigm if you respond to symbols and not so much the policy.
Yeah, I always thought that the left did a pretty good job from an optics standpoint, though, right? I mean, the policy was there, but what about the optics, right? So if you look at the inauguration of '46, right, you had the brother who Eugene, who defended the Capitol, who then made what's the position called?
Sergeant at arms, or I believe
Sergeant at arms.
yeah.
He was made sergeant at arms, and then you had Jamie from South Carolina, who ran against Lindsey Graham. Now is the head of the DNC, and then you had Warnock, who takes the Senate seat in Georgia. I mean, the optics. I thought the optics were pretty clear. You had Clyburn, out there, doing his thing.
I mean, he saved the Biden campaign.
Yeah.
It's some of it may be class as well too. Some of them may say it again.
In which way?
In the sense of, I think some of it may be class in the sense that you have some brothers who may feel like, some of it, because we've seen it even on panels where they may feel like some of these brothers are elitist, or they don't really connect with them on that level, that sometimes they can come across as talking down to them. That could be an element of it as well, because like you said, when you look at the victories, even historically, the left has done a lot, whether people like it or not. When you look at, like, from my state, the Scottsboro boys case, it was the communists that came down there and essentially challenged that case and had lawyers get involved. The left is always, we were talking the other day about A. Philip Randolph and his organizing and, leading a union. These things have always been there in history.
Meeting with FDR, 1940.
Yeah. Meeting with FDR. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, meeting again with Truman.
Yeah, he was big on. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it because of Randolph essentially that he pushes Truman to desegregate the military?
Yep, and to integrate the military again for World War II, right? So, and then you think about Korea, 50 to 53, and then you think about Eisenhower in 56. He played a very instrumental role, from a black man standpoint, in progressive politics. And so I always find it interesting that they only seem to focus on what they see on the screen and not what's happening on the ground. And I'm like, how do you rebrand the left, the progressive left, into, something that's, I guess, satisfying to, the dissatisfied on the Democrats who tend to go to the right now. I'm not. Yeah.
No, I think also you've got to get guys to determine what their end game is.
Mm-hmm.
Because what people don't realize is when people make these comments like Democrats don't do anything for black people, that's a Republican talking point as well. I mean, that's one of the. I was reading a book by a Republican strategist, and he literally said, that's one of their tactics is essentially play to the cynicism of black people. And how do you do that? You say, oh, this party hasn't done anything for you. Never mind challenging people to be like, well, hey, were they trying to do things and this other party essentially was trying to thwart them from doing these things?
Mm-hmm.
That conversation doesn't come up. It's Democrats don't do anything, and it's like, okay, people shouldn't vote, but people don't realize big picture. Republicans win two ways. You either essentially get more votes by obviously, having a large turnout, but you getting more votes, or you just encourage basically Democrats not to turn out to vote, and you get, your base essentially to turn out. They have a twofold strategy of winning versus, if for Dems, you've got to get people to turn out. You rarely see Republicans, if ever, I've never seen one, doing something like a voter turnout drive.
Right. They do a lot of handshaking and stuff on the ground, but I don't know how effective that is. I don't think they really connect with, the left that way. I think they're really effective at shaming the left for identity politics. And so now we're just talking about a culture war, basically. They're playing the culture war card to the fullest extent possible. And when you fight the culture war, when you're too weak to fight the other actual war based on policy. And so I see going to the right as a means of cut and run, where it's convenient, but still take the stimulus check when it's convenient as well, right? Because I don't see anybody taking those checks, and put them in paper shredders and saying, I don't want this from the left, right? So they take the goodies from the left, but then they run to the right. But when they run to the right, I can't think of anything that's over there that would be, of substance, right?
I struggle because I've heard people, even if you have someone like a Michael Steele who's legitimately trying to bring people to the right and organize around, I'm like, you got to change the substance of the policy because I don't want a policy that's got, black people behind it, but the policies are detrimental to black people.
Mhm.
Because when you look at things like, like I said, I'm from the South. So when you look at things like the environment, like people's race is the number one determinant for where something like a landfill or, radioactive material, what type of area or county that's going to go in. Race is the number one determining factor for that. That's something that the right has been notorious on having loose restrictions around the environment. If you look at places like Louisiana, what's going on down in Tampa right now with one of their facilities where they're talking about basically, I believe it's some radioactive material that may end up in the in one of the bodies of waters out in that area. Those things are problematic, and I I wouldn't want, even if you could get legitimately recruit black people to that side. It's like, do you really want to embrace that platform of, hey, unregulated capitalism, when you already know, like you've stated before, Mike, how black people suffer from asthma at a higher rate, having to deal with lead paint in houses, all of these things that we've basically experienced. It's like, even if you could put a black face on that and sell it, it's not going to be good for you in the long run.
Yeah, and that's where I like I said before, I feel very perplexed by this because, okay, all of the bad things that are happening really right now. If you think about the three poorest states in the United States, in the 48 lower body of the states, um, Arkansas, West Virginia, and Mississippi. Mississippi has a big water issue right now happening in Jackson, right? Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah.
You also have Arkansas with all of these sort of 14th Amendment rights that they're fighting right now. They also have an infrastructure issue like crazy. And then you think about West Virginia, that's just one big mess because of the coal mining going out of business, basically being null and void after this year. And so they have a lot of respiratory issues and things of that nature where they are. And I'm not seeing, how can you sell that as a brand, right? As a Republican, how can you sell that, right? If you if you're a coal miner, maybe you should learn how to code, right? But on the right, they don't have a solution to that problem. We just saw what happened in Texas not too long ago, where Cancun Cruise basically took a flight up out of there when things got hectic. And how do you sell that? But it doesn't seem like, I mean, so to your point, they have the bumper sticker branding, but the reality of their branding is that it's filled with nothing, because this guy leaves the state, Ted Cruz. Mississippi is having a major infrastructure issue. In fact, it has a D+ grade according to the recent report card for this year. It has the lowest grade in the country.
And let's not forget, it's not like Mississippi is this major built up massive infrastructure like a New York or a California like that. You're talking about mainly what roads, some ports, and some highways and stuff like that. Not major bridges and major overpasses.
Yeah, but the point of the matter here is that if the branding is the issue, then was substance really a concern for them? Because if substance was a concern as well, why not critique all of these red states for their lack of infrastructure and their infrastructure grades? Because most of the red states do have at least a D minus on average.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it goes back to culture is very powerful for some people. They will. I mean, we've seen it for the right for years with working class and poor whites. Economics doesn't seem to matter to these people as much as culture war and ego and the perception that I'm doing better than black people.
I mean, if you're a white candidate.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So like, unfortunately, I think some of that element, maybe not, obviously not the racial element, but some of that same thinking of, hey, the rhetoric and the symbols and the culture matters, and I'm not too concerned with the policy.
Yeah.
Maybe black men fall into that same trap in some regard.
Yeah. And they seem to prefer a time period that they never lived in from
Oh
a brand.
yeah,
Yeah, it's really strange because they enjoy all the luxuries of an iPhone, Samsung Galaxy, laptops, Wi-Fi, 5G, 4G, smartwatches, and Hulu and Netflix.
YouTube super
Yeah,
chats.
yes, yes. Social media, right? They enjoy all of the creature comforts of next generation technology that kind of came from a liberal, um, position, right? Silicon Valley is basically a
Yeah,
liberal society,
yeah,
right?
liberal, multicultural, progressive society.
Yeah, they seem to really embrace all of the benefits of the left, but when it comes to the branding of it, they're like, oh well, I don't really like this. Okay, so why don't you put down that laptop and put down that smartphone then? And why don't you just go back to a rotary phone? But they don't really want to do that. And so I don't know if the progressives can actually I don't know if the progressives can actually do anything branding wise to actually convince, the dissatisfied to be satisfied with the progressives, right? Because they've done a lot of policy. I mean, look at the Green New Deal as an example from AOC. So instead of the Green New Deal, AOC now becomes the focus, right? And so now instead of looking at the benefits of the Green New Deal, they look at AOC and they're like, oh well, I don't like her. Okay, so based on what,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, she's been demonized by the right. The only thing that I think may is because I think the other thing is too, they lump they think the left is basically anybody who's a Democrat. They think Joe Biden's a leftist.
Yeah,
And the only thing I have heard is that, a lot of these, no, I shouldn't say a lot, but some of these guys who do embrace the right, I have heard them embrace someone like a Bernie. Like, hey, I would have voted for Bernie if, I don't want Biden, I don't want Clinton, but, I would have voted for Bernie. And, Bernie's policies are, very progressive, is really, given life to the movement. So part of me wonders if you have someone like that um, who has policies that are truly, transformational, and you don't end up with some of the Democrats who try to pass themselves off as moderates or try to distance themselves from some of those policies. I wonder if that would attract people if say you do have a Green New Deal, and then there are all these jobs, installing wind farms, um,
solar panels.
solar panels, wind turbines, all of that. If more jobs in gigafactories for electric cars. If they see the economic fallout behind some of these policies, maybe that will you know bring them back into the fold.
Right. So based on what you're saying is that they have a problem with establishment Democrats and not so much with Bernie Sanders. For whatever reason, Bernie Sanders is the exception to what they're looking at.
From what I've heard, I don't know if you've heard similar. Or
Yeah, I get the point that you're making though, that Bernie Sanders is somehow the outsider, despite the fact he's been in office for a very long time.
yeah, yeah,
And somehow Joe Biden, he's been in there for 47 years, and what has he done? And I'm like, well, he did do VAWA, right? he was in charge of a few things. He did bring a lot of wealth to Delaware. I mean,
Helped whether you agree with his role or not, how big his role was, but had a role in taking protesting South Africa.
oh yeah, yeah. I don't know. Are you saying Bernie, or are you saying
I'll say
Biden?
Biden.
Yeah, yeah. Biden has a pretty clear track record. Whether you agree with his track record or not, he has a pretty clear track record. And so it's, to your point, I think that they're looking at the establishment rather than the substance itself. They see establishment and they see bad. Whereas Trump, they embrace Trump as an outsider, despite the fact that he's been very, rubbing elbows with the left anyways for the last 25 years.
Yeah, because the people you hear them refer, that they don't like, obviously Joe Biden, he's a blue dog Democrat essentially. Hillary Clinton was not a progressive. The progressive wing was very critical of her and did not like her. Even Kamala Harris, the progressive wing was very much turned off by her. But these are the names that you hear brought up in this space of of guys saying that they don't like. And I mean, truth be told, he was hamstrung, and he he talked about some of the reasons why he couldn't push an agenda that he wanted to. But even Obama, you even had liberals. One liberal wrote a book called I believe it's called Buyer's Remorse. Where he was talking about he was disappointed that things like gun control were not tackled, or you couldn't get universal health care. You just kind of you got I'm sorry, single payer health care. You got you got Obamacare. Now obviously, like I said, he dealt with one of the most combative Congresses for 6 years, and you come into office and you have 2 years with the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. So definitely a full plate there. But he sort of has not lived up to what people who were progressive really wanted as well either.
Right. Right. I mean, you take what you can get, right? And at the end of the day, um, Biden is what we got, and we kind of have to sit here and just deal with it for what it is, like him or not. And so, but it seems like that doesn't satisfy them either. Nothing seems to satisfy them when it comes to the establishment. I think people who supported Bernie were pretty ticked off about Bernie not getting the head nod either, and so, but they didn't go to the right. That's the difference, right? They were 10 toes down for Bernie in 2016 and 2020, and they didn't they didn't go to my knowledge. I think the people who supported Bernie really on his campaign did not turn coat to the right.
No,
Whereas,
it was a much lower, like he's talked about it. There were more people in 2008 who, when Clinton lost in the primaries, went and voted for McCain than when Bernie lost, that went and voted for Trump. Some people may have become disaffected and chose not to vote, or voted third party, but this narrative that they went and voted for Trump is just not true.
right, right. But it seems like in Black spaces, in terms of the Black community in context, the dissatisfaction with Biden and the non-selection of Bernie is justification to go to the right. But if you think about going to the right, you went to the right, but what did you get from it? Well, I just went to the right and that was it. Well, if the branding and the optics was the problem, when you get to the right, what did you get from the right? Well, I just like to hang out here. All right. I mean, I don't know. I don't get it, but I mean, if that's your choice, I just don't. Because what's happening here is what I'm seeing is that there's this question that comes up about the branding of the progressives. The progressives got to do some better job at marketing and branding and campaigning and things like that. And I'm like, how much more can you get done? How much more does it take to really entice people to really embrace what the progressives are doing? Because it seems like they put Biden in the same bucket with AOC, despite the fact that AOC and the DSA are radically different from the establishment. In fact, the establishment is in conflict with the progressives.
Oh yeah, you're going to see more of that if I was listening to, I believe it was Steve Schmidt essentially saying that he's making the argument that essentially Republicans don't have really don't have the choice of flirting with a third party. You're either basically going to be a Republican, or as he says, you're going to become a Biden Republican, essentially. Sort of like you had Reagan Democrats back in the day. Um, and he was essentially saying, the progressive wing of the party is not going to like this, and see, that's where you're going to see the rift even more. Where you already saw it last year, where someone like John Kasich got more speaking time at the DNC than AOC did. So I mean that people don't recognize that rift is there, even though if what I think is going to happen with those parties, shifting, and Democrats essentially picking up some of the moderate or even center of the Republican Party and then pulling them in the fold, you're definitely going to see a rift between the progressive part of the party and the more moderate part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when it would be a waste of time for for the left, the progressives, to actually rebrand themselves at this point. I think we should just cut our losses. If you lose them, you lose them. There's not really much that you can do to really gain them back, because if the dissatisfaction is just the branding itself, right? You don't like the logo, you don't like the logo on the floor, right? You don't like the fact that it features Lady Liberty somehow is indicative of the dissatisfaction. We need to replace her with like He-Man or something like that. I don't know, because rebranding is a lot of effort and money involved, and I don't think progressives have a lot of money to be rebranding, and I don't think they have a lot of wiggle room to really rebrand either.
And I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I looked at CPAC from last month, and they had a lot of young Black faces at CPAC.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Maj Toure, Wayne Dupree was there from YouTube, but these are all Black people. And
okay, so you're talking more of the lineup now. I'm assuming not as many, just like rank and file, or you saw a lot of diversity there as well too.
They tried to push for diversity, but see, that's what I'm saying. If the optics and the branding is the issue, the right understands that. And so they brought all these Black and brown faces to CPAC this year, and I didn't see it really move the needle.
Yeah, that's a weird position to be in, where you got people, you literally had in this past administration, you had literally Stephen Miller in their craft and policy in the White House. I mean, whose mentor when he was in college was Richard Spencer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you got this weird dynamic of populism, racism, and then you're trying to appeal to this small group of Black people, Black men, I guess particularly, and it's just like it's just a wild combination of people when you think about it.
Yeah, I think they're too fickle to latch on to for a vote. I'm not saying. So, what was the numbers, right, for Trump this year? He went from 8% in 2016 to 18%, something like that. Was it 12%?
Yeah, I think he was around 12% for Black men. And I think he got 18% of Black
Mm-hmm.
men. He actually, and he increased with Black women as well too. But I mean, still overall, I want to say like 88% of black people still voted Democrat this time around. I know it was in the 80s, maybe like 84, 88, something like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, he did, but I mean that's been trending that way anyway.
Mhm.
You know, Romney it started to tick up with McCain. I think it kind of hit a low point with Bush. But it's been ticking in that direction, and I guess part of me also wonders if you take a step outside of the space. Some people may be claiming that um, if you start looking at upwardly mobile black men, you
Mhm.
know, black men who are making over $100,000 a year, some of them may be making the argument, okay, these guys are holding their nose and voting with their pocketbook, which um, I mean, I don't know any in my circle who, because I travel in some not to brag or anything, but travel with some well-to-do black men in my circle. I haven't heard that rhetoric from them of hey, I'm making X amount of dollars, so it's a tax. I don't want to pay any more taxes. Just from what I've seen, people may be making that type of money, but it's like at the end of the day, okay, I have family members who don't have health care, or I have an elderly parent or someone like that who is on disability or something like that, Social Security, that may get cut because of Republicans.
Yeah. Replace and repeal, and nothing was there. So the substance doesn't matter to them. Um, but you do hear the response to any sort of criticism of what's going on the right. They say, well, what about Trump created this many jobs, or this decreased unemployment for black men by this sort of percentage points, or he increased the amount of job opportunities for black men under the. But then when you look at it, there's no real citation to the sources, right? There's nothing really there. It's stuff that was already happening, when Obama was in office, and kind of you had this sort of inertia that came in during Trump. That came from the Biden, came from the Obama administration, but they never really articulate that. And so it seems like they're trying to create the brand of victory over the left from, for coming from the right. But at the same time, there's nothing really tangible there, right? You kind of hear them talk, but you can't really find any of that information of substance. And so they focus on culture because that's the only war they can fight.
Now, from your perspective, maybe it's going back to the marketing. Maybe it's, hey, black people need, or the progressives need to reach out to black men in a way, focusing on maybe their own set of talking points. I don't know about you, but I guess the question would be to you, and I can go first with my thoughts. But what would you think would be, I guess, the number one thing that progressive can really point to and say this helps black men? For me, I would think, going back to what I was talking to, is a better economy. Just in general, the policies they're pushing are going to grow the economy. Black men have always had a problem with unemployment in this country. That's one for me. Um, trying to have more equity in the justice system, as well as repairing things. Ending or definitely scaling way back things like the war on drugs, which was originally created by one of Nixon's own advisors, who admitted was essentially to criminalize black people. Getting more access to higher education, at a cheaper price that will make it so, essentially, more economic mobility. These brothers who aspire to do something, go to college, go on to a professional school, ensure that they don't come out with hundreds of $1,000s of debt. Those are things that just come to mind initially. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, I think environmental justice is a real strong point, right? I mean, we're talking about cleaning up, just the environment itself. I mean, if you look at a map for COVID, at the beginning of COVID, And during the lockdown, you'll see that how much pollution went away almost immediately when all the cars were taken off the road and things went into lockdown. That was the result of that. And so they tie in the pollution and the conditions of contracting COVID, and you see that um, there's a symbolic evidence that yes, if people who live in this area with this much pollution are more likely to contract COVID, and so therefore we should probably take uh, more means of action against uh, vehicles who put out this many, carbon monoxide and things like that. This much pollution, right? And so that sort of activism is there, but on the right, that's not there. So I think progressives can actually get a really strong play by fighting environmental racism, including busing and trucking and what do you call it, the water filtration systems, desalination systems and things of that nature, better better access to quality mask, right? So you're talking about there should be a community health center within a 15-minute walk rather than a 30-45 minute ambulance ride to an emergency room, right? So these are things that tie into each other, access to quality healthcare through ACA, through you know location, right? Locale, right? I think progressives can actually make the play for that, but I think they've already made that play. But it seems like the people who are dissatisfied with the progressives don't seem to really care about that.
Yeah, another thing that came to mind was unions. Black men, like we were talking about earlier with A. Philip Randolph. And that time period in the 40s and 30s, that was the biggest employer of black men was Pullman Porters, and it's a unionized role, and that essentially, gave black men, the ability to have something relative, a level of dignity as far as the work they were doing, and black men have historically been excluded from unions, and then when you look at a lot of the blue collar black men, if you're blue collar and can get into a union job, that's the way to go versus being in a non-union. So you'll hear a lot of brothers who would say, hey, I don't want to do the college thing, go to trade school, get a skill, get a trade. you know if historically the progressives have backed unions as well too, so that's another alley to go down as well. The one thing I've noticed is, and you've seen it, is these guys also associate, I guess, things like child support and being pro woman with the left and being progressive, and I think that's a turnoff. And it's ironic because I sent you all that email a couple days back on the state of Utah essentially passing a law that said a man is essentially, if he's not married to a woman, is responsible for half of the medical costs with associated with I believe it's not just childbirth, but it may be the health leading up, like the prenatal care as well. That comes out of Utah. Deep red state. Voted for Trump both times. Um, but guys, I haven't heard anyone in this space talk about it. But they'll rail against child support and associate it with the left when that was a Reagan era reform. They don't even realize that that's a conservative policy. We've talked about this on other channels, that you're essentially you're taking the burden off society and putting it on the individual as far as being responsible for children. So you know that is so, I think guys are so mixed up and associate that image with the left, they don't even realize that the right is pushing a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about unions, AOC skipped the inauguration day and was out there campaigning with the labor unions, the Teamsters. So on the optics level and on the substance level, I think they've already done that, right? Joe Biden during his campaign was out there with the stop and shop union, labor union out there freezing with them. Um, I- you know, in terms of in terms of some of the other aspects of it, it seems like see,
Infrastructure.
yeah, infrastructure too. Infrastructure can matter, but it seems like the union wise, it's really the Republicans have been cracking down on the unions. So if you really think about Amazon's, big union victory in was that Alabama?
Yeah, it was right outside of Birmingham and Bessemer.
Yeah, and there it is. If the party was so much about um, it's so much about the labor movement, or at least on the optics level, it's supposed to be about labor. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it at all. And so what to your question about what can they do from a branding standpoint to entice people, I think that they've done more than their fair share. But I do think from an advertising standpoint, I think the blowback comes from too much intersectionality. I would
Yeah,
agree with them on way too much of it. It's I think you already have women, you know,
I mean,
supporting the movement. So I'm not sure why it needs to, why you need to throw a Hail Mary, from the opposite side of the field when you're already moving the ball.
yeah, I mean, you're. I mean, like you said, you're someone who's a progressive, so it's kind of like if you're a Republican, you don't have to tell someone you're for low taxes. You're a Republican.
Hmm.
Same thing there. You're a progressive. You don't have to go like you said, carry the intersectionality card or wear it on your sleeve. People should know you're a progressive. You may not be deep down in it, but at the end of the day, they know you're pro equality, equal pay for equal work, things along those lines.
Yeah, and maybe okay. So look, I'll play devil's advocate and say, okay, the why does the progressive left, or not even just the progressive left, just the left alone, why do they feel that they need to keep announcing and pronouncing how intersectional they are and how diverse they are? And I think people who already gravitate to the left already know that the left is about that. So the way how I would actually fine tune the branding um is by actually focusing on the environment itself and not so much about the people, because what happens when you put it, it if you overload your bucket with too many people and too many of their issues into one bucket, it, it just overflows, and now you can't really figure out what's the priority, right? Is it going to be um black men being shot by unjustly by police? Is it going to be women's rights and to abortion and things like that, and women empowerment and the she session and things of that? You got to figure out which fight you're going to fight first, and because having way too many identities into one bucket really does cause a lot of confusion, because okay, so what's the priority here and what's not the priority? I'm of the opinion we can look at the data, look at the science, and see where the priority should be. And I think that the Green New Deal kind of covers all that, but people push back against the Green New Deal without even understanding what it is, because it came from AOC. Okay, so let's throw Ed Markey at it. Oh, well, he's an old white guy. Okay, so who can you throw it at? Well, let's throw Obama at it. Well, Obama's not, you know, he's come and gone, right? Who can you actually put as the avatar for progressives or progressivism?
I think it's got to be Bernie. Uh, at least if you're talking about a political person, only because the ideas that he was talking about. I remember when he ran in 2016 and no one gave him a chance. People thought he was crazy talking about things like $15 minimum wage, universal health care, free tuition, like you said, Green New Deal, all of these things. But, Florida in this past election passed a $15 minimum wage. You have people like Elizabeth Warren right now that's putting pressure on the Biden administration to cancel $50,000 in student loans. These conversations were started by him, and to me, he did the work, the grassroots work, to really get people out there to understand these ideas. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe those three ideas have a majority of American support.
Yeah, yeah. For the most part, I don't see too much pushback. Even the infrastructure plan, has significant support from both sides. 2/3 of both sides are really pushing for it. So I think the establishment on the right are the ones pushing back. Saying, "Well, this is really going to tax us really bad." Well, okay, so let's take away the infrastructure bill off the table. So what's the alternative? Oh, the alternative is to do nothing. All right, and see, how do you compete against that? Because they don't have to do anything. They don't have to rebrand. They don't have to retool. They don't have to do anything other than just be Republican and be on the right and be anti-left. That's the only branding strategy that I see them working with. And the left's response is, well, that's just those guys over there. And I'm like, no, we have to make a better case for this. We have to come up with some better data, and really produce it to the point where we persuade them to actually say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we probably don't need, those bulldozers putting out all that pollution, as they, rip up the streets, up and down the streets with 35-inch wheels on it, you know, putting out all the CO2 that they possibly could. What about all these hospitals? A lot, West Virginia and these other places, a lot of these people who did not have access to quality care didn't have access to a quality clinic either. Infrastructure is pretty much needed, and I see a lot of people who are pushing back against the left, who are going to the right. The right, the right's whole thing is to heckle the left, and the left is saying, well, maybe we should rebrand. And I'm saying, rebrand to what? What more can you possibly do?
Yeah. I think part of it is what you're seeing when you say the right can just essentially sit back and do nothing. Part of that is they're still sort of stuck on that Obama era strategy that worked for them. Pretty much from 2010 on, they basically said, we're gonna basically obstruct anything they try to do. And you have a large segment of society who's okay with that because they perceive that their status and their privilege is being threatened. So that's for one end how they're able to get away with it. I think the other thing is Dems, when they at least under Obama, you know when they did get a win like a stimulus, they didn't really go and sell it. And that's what you sort of seen recently with the stimulus is, they've went out on the road, put up billboards and things like that to really try to take credit for it versus, Obama's signature legislation his term was Obamacare. And, Dems spent 2010 essentially running away from it.
Mm-hmm.
So in my opinion, Dems have sort of dropped the ball on major legislation as far as passing it and then really being a champion of, hey, look what we did, taking credit for it. And I think that is part of what enables some of the Republicans to just feel entitled to say, okay, if I just sit there and be obstructionist, I'm not really going to have to answer for anything because, even though Dems did something, they won't take credit for it because they're afraid of the fallout or, they're just not at the best at branding. And then it turns into, okay, you have this perception of there's gridlock.
Mm-hmm.
When in all actuality, it's not so much gridlock. It's one party is really just obstructionist and doesn't want any real progress.
Yeah, if you leave it up to them, they'll go back to the Stone Age, or at least far back enough that you don't have all of these sort of digital transformations happening. Cell phones, iPhones, smartphones, things of that nature. They wouldn't go. They would rather sacrifice that than to have any sort of progress. And I don't know. I think that maybe the timing for the progressive left is too early. maybe they're 10 years too early, and that the obstruction is right is 10 years too late. And so you don't have this sort of equilibrium happening politically for the voter, right? The voter can't make a solid decision because the timing of the two parties and the two ideologies is at the wrong time. 10 years ago, the Republicans were really strong. The right was really strong, right? The conservatives were strong.
You had the Tea Party emerging, and
yeah, they were really strong. 2008, 2010, really strong coming out of the gate. And then today, when COVID hit, when the pandemic took place, they were kind of, empty. They were empty suit for all intents and purposes. But then when you think about the progressive left, you're looking at them and you're like, oh, I don't really like what I see. But what you see is the future. From an optic standpoint, is really the future. It's really trending in that area. We know that the place is going to become a lot more browner over the next 10 to 20 years. It's not going to become less brown. It's going to be more brown. It's going to be less white. And so the AOCs, the Ilhan Omars, the Rashida Tlaibs, the Tulsi Gabbards, that's what America's going to look like. Like that's the face of the party, the optics of the party. That's it right there in a nutshell. And so I think the people who are running away from it and saying, I don't like the branding of it, I think that they haven't learned to accept it yet. It's a lot more aerodynamic and it's a lot more, turbo-ish, so to speak, right? It's a lot more sleeker than what the square box of the obstruction is right.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that about progressive maybe being 10 years too early. I was having this debate with someone else on a message board, and they were essentially saying that they saw the country as being leftist, and I was like, really? I was like, I definitely don't see it. And I pulled up an article and posted it saying, it was from Pew, basically saying that the majority of the country, at least prior to the beginning of in the beginning of 2020, identified as conservative. Conservative, then moderate, and liberal was around 20%, conservative was around 40, and I believe the moderate was around the mid 30s as well. Now this that poll was from mid July, so almost a year ago, and moderate had ticked up a little bit. And it was actually like I want to say like 36%, and then like conservative was like 34, and liberal was like 24, something along those lines. So to me, I think the interesting thing will be, obviously, the millennials, my generation, we at least have the reputation of being more progressive. It'll be interesting to see if it follows that same trend of, as people get older, they become more conservative. Um, with the demographics and diversity and education, it'll be interesting to see if that trend sticks, just because, those things, diversity and education, tend to produce more progressive people in general. And I believe now millennials, this past election, were the largest voting bloc. So it'll be interesting to see how those dynamics play out, because someone like Roland Martin, he was mentioning the fact that him and I guess some of the polling people that they've worked with have done some basically studying of millennials, and he thought white millennials actually tended to vote like their white counterparts in Gen X and Boomers, and that the real big change was what the Hispanics, the black people, and the Asians, what they were doing in millennials was, and that millennial demographic was really driving the change.
It's a good point to end on. Yeah, I think we should pay attention to this throughout the year. The year's not over yet. We haven't got to Biden's first 100 days, so we'll do an update on that and see how it really works out in terms of the branding of it. But then, thank you for joining Renaissance Man, and Thank you to everyone else who's watching this on the replay. Please hit the like button and share it. Also follow us on Twitter, brothers_podcast on Twitter. So we do post on it. Just posted today for the first time. Also, if you have any comments and concerns, make sure you leave it in the chat.